course. The new person that's here with us tonight, that is Arlene Scott Nicky. She's gonna be helping out. She's gonna be helping out with the chaperoning and supervising here in the future. She brought cookies for you all too, so you guys better thank her for that.
Thank you for the cookies.
Scott Nicky, all one word. But it's like two guys.
Thank you.
Do you wanna introduce yourself, or?
Okay.
You don't have to if you don't want
Well,
to.
my name is Arlene Scott Nicky. My last name is like two guys' names, Scott and Nicky, but it's all one word, Scott Nicky. You're welcome to call me Miss Arlene, or you can call me Mrs. Scott Nicky, whatever you want to do. I've been coming here for 30 years, and I first came here when the pastor was Reverend Jim Morgan, and then we've had a number of changes since then, and each time we continue to grow and grow, and it's been really wonderful experience being a part of this church family. And I was really tickled that Jeff called and asked, well, he mentioned in church that he needed some help, so I talked with him, and I was happy to be able to come and meet with you all this evening. So I'm glad you all are a part of this. I know when I was closer to your ages, which was 100 years ago, my youth group was such fun, and we just, it's something that stays with you. You remember the years that you were with youth group, and I hope that you really treasure these times and remember it for a lifetime, and remember what you learned.
Hey, y'all be sure to show her the proper gratitude. If it weren't for her and the other people that have come out, I wouldn't be allowed to have these meetings, because we need more adults that are not related to me for legal reasons. And she brought cookies for all of you tonight, so be sure to be extra thankful for that.
Oh, and I have to tell you something about that. My mom is 97 years old, and I go over to see her every Thursday. And a week ago, yesterday, she said to me that when she taught Sunday school, she used to have some of the kids come from her Sunday school class and make cookies with her. And she said, I want to have a cookie play date. I said, oh, so you want to have a play date with me, and we're going to make cookies? And she said, yeah. So that's what we did yesterday. My mother and I made the cookies. So we had a fun time.
Oh, that's nice.
Let you guys have some of those after the lessons tonight. Shouldn't be too long tonight.
How about the Christmas party next week?
I was getting to
Oh,
that.
okay.
I think there are 40, well,
So the Christmas party's gonna be next week, cause that won't have a lesson. Pastor Amy will be here. We're gonna have pizza for that, right?
Yeah. If they want pizza.
Are we doing the art?
I'm going to assume that's a yes, that y'all want
I
pizza.
want pizza. Pizza.
Pineapple
That's
pizza.
against the rules. Stop.
Pineapple pizza?
What
No,
happened about pizza?
no.
He'll make sure he doesn't order that.
He's not ordering
You look
it.
serious about it.
I'm so lost.
All right, what I want to know before I order the pizza, how many here wants pepperoni? 3. How many want regular? Okay.
Well, decided a number of them later, but like we could get like 2
Alright.
pepperoni and the rest regular, something like that.
1 pepperoni. Okay, and here's another thing I need to know. What kind of beverages besides soda would you want besides water too?
Apple
Gatorade.
cider,
Apple.
Kool-Aid,
Kool-Aid?
eggnog.
No.
Orange juice.
I can't tell. Do you not like it?
Apple
Yeah.
juice, everybody, how about
Let's
apple
give you a
juice?
bug.
Are we talking about?
I wanna
alcohol?
see hands, who would
No.
drink apple juice?
No.
James? Who would drink
Apple cider.
Capri Sun.
Apple juice.
Apple juice, yeah.
Pineapple juice.
How about Capri Suns?
No.
Pineapple juice,
yeah.
Seriously?
Pineapple juice.
Okay, we'll see about that, all right. Okay, that answers that.
I would have said no.
All right then.
We're still talking about the lock-in, of course. I'm still trying to come up with some other adult supervision that would actually be willing to stay the night here with the rest of us. So if any of you want to go home and ask your parents about that, I would more than appreciate that, especially because I'd love to see them out here too sometime. Yep.
Does he count as an adult?
No.
No, I need
You have to be
they
over
need to
21.
21 or up. But unfortunately, David would have qualified otherwise.
Yeah,
No, I think you have to be 22.
Those are 22.
I think so. Well, he's not spending the night.
Yeah, and, wait, where do you stay the night, Andrew? I don't remember.
I might.
Oh, even so, it would be, I know Pastor Ernie would prefer just to make sure that all the bases are covered, that we still get some extra supervision besides that. Especially if any of your mothers or any other female family members that are old enough would like to participate. It would go a lot
Stephen,
better
get
if we
up
had at
again.
least one woman throughout the night, since my mom will not be wanting to stay here till,
Now I work here all week.
what's that, 12 hours almost.
I'm not sleeping here.
I won't even sleep, I'll probably stay up.
Yeah,
The couches are not comfy.
if you guys can do that if you'd like, it's a lot harder than you'd think, I'll tell you that.
Oh, it's not.
That's
hard.
because these
All
chairs
night
are
is very
comfortable.
long if
It's
you have
so
nothing
easy.
to do.
Bro, it's so comfortable.
Manhunt, 3 a.m.
That would certainly not be out of the realm of stuff was done before. What was that, Andrew?
Are we going to the fire station again?
Is that something you guys have done before?
No, they're not doing anything like that right now.
I did that last time.
Yeah, there's been enough food on drives right now. I don't think they're planning on. I think they actually just had one up at Food Line not too long ago.
I think they did. I think they gave like a bunch of teachers stuff. I heard about that.
Oh, okay, but right now I doubt that anything.
He needed to say something.
What did you say then?
He did.
You need to
Well,
say
it sounded
something,
like you
Andrew?
cut him off. It sounded like you cut him off. Like it sounded like you were starting something. No. But he said fire truck.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's make sure.
So like if you guys wanted to ask your dad or anyone, like,
Yes, we're.
it's not a problem if he, oh, okay. It's not a problem if any of your family are not able to, like.
And they don't have to
Stuff like
be
this,
here
like-
at 7 o'clock. They
Yeah,
can come
they
at
wouldn't have to be
9.
here right at 7, so long as they were able to be here by like 9 or so, that would be fine too.
Our
I'm
dad.
probably gonna ask Andrea's dad to see if he can come by that time.
Raph, you sleeping here?
I don't know yet. I'm not sleeping.
You don't have to.
He's
You can
comfortable.
still- you can still come for service
Right.
yourself and then
He's
leave at the
comfortable,
normal
very
time if you
uncomfortable.
have someone to pick you up.
Are they really?
Yeah,
I'm
sleeping on the
bringing the
road.
64.
that's uncomfortable too.
And
Oh,
then
that chili
64.
stayed
Oh.
still there, remember?
64.
Great.
From the Super Bowl course?
Nintendo 64.
Oh, you got Mario Kart?
Not yet.
We're not gonna decide what it is right now, but, you guys can also collectively decide, and I'm gonna cap this at one. One embarrassing thing that you would like me to do for your own enjoyment
When?
at the lock-in.
It has
That
to
can be
something
easily
that can't
embarrassing.
affect
That doesn't
anyone.
involve dumping water on me, because I don't wanna have to get changed.
Eat pineapple pizza.
I was afraid you guys would.
Yes!
That's a good one.
That is against.
You gotta
the
eat one
rules. Wait, so
slice.
this is for each of us, or
No, oh God, no.
We
you
all
guys
gotta
can
agree?
collectively pick
guys? You got
one.
to think of one.
Pineapple
Pineapple
We're
pizza.
not deciding what that is now, you guys can come up with that
Sleep
later,
outside in the
possibly
cold.
next week at the party.
No.
I just wanted
You're
to
gonna get, like,
sing the Lucky Star opening.
That's the point.
Not the point.
Seem like a
You can
red-
take care
I
of
want
them.
you to sing the Lucky Star opening.
Seem like a
Let's
redneck?
just send them over to your house.
Look it up.
Yeah.
What about we have them watch anime?
I
Now.
already watch anime, what's your point?
That's.
That, no, you burn
I
everything.
can't
Think when I.
Watch My Little Pony.
Oh, God.
Now.
Strawberry shortcake.
No. Have him have a VR headset on so he can not just
Do you
rip it
even
off.
have one?
A VR headset?
Yeah.
It's just the VR goggles.
No, I know that, but does anyone have one, though?
My dad.
Oh.
Oh, this must be nice.
Well, I'm not using someone else's VR headset or something. When you guys will decide that later, we're not coming up with all that tonight.
Play Minecraft.
I dare you to
We don't have like a whole month
Granny.
left before this thing happens.
I just heard.
No, I don't want Minecraft.
All right, that's
Christian
basically all
Minecraft.
that's basically all the announcements
Oh.
and stuff I had for tonight. So before we get any further, anyone had anything that we need to pray about later?
No,
My back.
I don't know.
You're back, yeah, forget about that later.
We broke this,
I fractured my back. I didn't break it.
same difference.
How'd you do that?
I have great. Well, it just randomly
Yeah, it
happens.
hurts.
You didn't
Like
do
you
anything.
can get it from nothing.
You did
Right.
get it for
First,
nothing.
that
It's called.
kitchen
It's called grade. It's called grade 1.
He didn't do
Grade
anything,
one.
it's just common in his age of kids.
Grade
He
1,
didn't do anything.
He's growing and it happened.
Pondy
No.
Low.
No,
It can
it just
happen.
happens, it's just
Trying to
in his
remember what it's
age.
called.
Whoa.
People
Pondy
always
Low
say-
thesis, something like
Yeah,
that.
whatever it's called, we'll
I
still
think it's
pray
hurt
over
so
it.
much, the littlest thing possible.
If there's nothing else, we'll just start the lesson.
You need a meme about that.
So, tonight I was gonna focus on Matthew chapter 1. The reason I picked this particular lesson is it's on a portion of that chapter that I
Why does it say
guarantee
the
you
memory
none
card
of
is
you
right
have ever
protected?
actually paid attention to in the Bible before.
Where's
That's
the
because
record
no one
button?
ever pays attention to this. Before I get into that, somewhat of a rhetorical question, but feel free to answer. Now, how important is family to all of you?
Very.
Very.
And for what reason?
I don't know what
You think
What is the thing? That is a thing.
That's a good
Have a
enough
house to
explanation.
live in.
Steven just rattled.
All right, going deeper than that, do any of you know much about family members that you had from like your grandparents' generation on back, like people that like far preceded you and your family?
Great grandparents, probably. Great grand.
I'll take that as a probably no.
My great grandma's still alive.
Now, you don't have to answer this particular question, but and just think about this for a moment. Are there any like parts of your family, especially further back in your ancestry, that you or your family are not necessarily embarrassed by, but that you just don't like to think about because of like something bad or something, just isn't good to think about? Just think about that for a second. Most of us have some part of our family that's like that. For example, our family, the people from before my dad's mother, aside from the fact that a lot of them were apparently quite abusive, there were a few of them that were quite horrible racists, but they're all long gone. So we all have parts of our family that were probably like that at some point.
And we're also related to Abraham Lincoln.
Very, very distantly,
Who is?
we are.
We are.
More like we were related to his wife.
Ow.
Somewhere very far back in my grandmother's mother's side,
Yes, you
on her
too.
side of the family.
Ah,
But that's so distant as to be completely inconsequential, like, that's,
My mom is her sister.
Oh, no wonder, that makes a whole lot of sense, Chris.
no.
That makes sense.
Because it does kind of
Can
look
actually
like
search that
that.
up.
well, seeing as how it wasn't him, but it was his
Bro,
wife. that's
doesn't
kind
he
of
look like
defeats the
Abraham
argument.
Lincoln?
I was
A little
thinking that.
guy.
No. Especially seeing as how he was 6'4".
He looks more like Rick Astley.
Didn't he have
What?
You don't even know
How
who
does
that
he
is.
not look like Rick Astley?
What?
Abraham Lincoln's my
I'm confused.
Rick Astley?
Nobody's
Rick Roll?
seen
No,
Never gonna give you up?
you don't look like.
No, that's what I'm saying, I don't, but that's besides the point.
Well, if you put orange hair, then I can see it. a
I'm
little
getting
bit,
lost
but
in a
no.
tangent here.
We are.
Hey, back to the
Settle down.
lesson. It's
Family,
So-
family.
The lesson tonight is on a part of the book of Matthew and also kind of on the book of Luke, but I'm not gonna focus on that one so much. That I guarantee you none of you have ever really paid attention to. And that's that little part right here at the start of the book of Matthew where we basically get Jesus' family lineage. I say none of you have probably looked at that, because basically anyone reading, they're all over the place, especially in the Old Testament. Most people just basically skip right over it because for the most part they're not terribly that important. But the ones we get in the New Testament, they're actually very important if you actually really look at what is actually being said there and who's actually being listed off. So these family tree things that we get in the Bible, they're called genealogies. They were very important in writings back in the biblical times. Basically, they were usually used when someone important was proving that they were related to someone else important, because that's kind of how you claimed more prestige and fame for yourself. Usually royalty did that. And seeing as how Jesus is supposed to be the Son of God, King of Kings, and all that stuff, makes sense that the people that were writing the Gospels about him would try to do the same thing. But it's kind of the subtext we get in that, and who is actually contained in that really gives us some of the important lessons out of that. And I didn't even realize some of these until very recently. So the version of this that we get in the book of Matthew is there's one in chapter 1 of Matthew, one in chapter 3 of Luke. They both kind of give you different details on that. Matthew links Jesus back to being descended from Abraham, the father of all Judaism, all Jewish people, the one that God, told him, I'm going to give you a nation's worth of descendants, and I'm going to make a kingdom out of them. What's around this thing? And it also ties him back by extension to King David, because that was a really important thing for Jesus to be the Messiah. The Messiah was said to be descended from the line of David, which is also supposed to then justify that Jesus is then supposed to be king of Israel. The book of Luke goes about it somewhat differently. That ties Jesus' ancestry straight back to Adam, which on its own doesn't sound that impressive because technically we're all descended from Adam. But more specifically, it ties Jesus directly back to Adam, so that way it can then say son of Adam, son of God, because Adam was, of course, the first human that God created. That's getting a little too academic. That's not really what I was focusing on tonight. So before I go any further into that, what are you guys expecting to hear from this family tree of Jesus's? Like, are you expecting everyone in it to be real impressive sounding and perfect and righteous and all that?
No.
No.
Yes, Nathan.
I think, I'm not sure, but didn't Jesus have a brother?
Yes, he did. Mary did have other children through Joseph. It's actually believed that one of them, James, was the writer of the book of James. You don't know that for certain, but most people believe that was the case. Yeah.
No, I was just joking. Because he had a brother named James. I think most likely his relatives would be jealous of him or something.
Now, I'm not talking about his immediate relatives. I'm talking about the people that he descended from. Are you expecting them to basically be all perfect and righteous people, since they're related to Jesus? Well, you basically guessed right. So it sounds like that would be the case, since we're basically tying Jesus' lineage all the way back to Abraham. Of course, Abraham, he was the father of Judaism. He's basically where all of the Jews come from. Of course, he had to be righteous. God picked him because he was righteous. Well, this particular family tree, it starts here. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob. Now Abraham, we read all over the place, God picked him because he was a righteous man amongst a bunch of people that weren't. But despite that, he's still human. He was not perfect. And despite the fact he was faithful to God most of the time, we still read of at least a few instances where he did not trust God in the way he needed to, and he kind of went off the path he was supposed to there. You guys remember from that little history of the Bible lesson I gave you, who were Abraham's two sons? No, that was Adam's sons.
Man.
Is that a hand up, Caleb?
No, I'm just reading.
All right, so Abraham's son that the rest of the Jewish people would descend from was Isaac, but he did have a son before that. That was Ishmael, the son that he had with his wife's slave, which God did not tell him to do that. He was not supposed to. They just didn't. Yeah.
Was Isaac, wait, so Isaac is the son?
Isaac is the second son of Abraham, but he was basically the one that got the inheritance, and that the rest of the Jewish people would be descended. Ishmael. And of course, as a lesson to us about when we don't listen to God, that had a lot of consequences. That Ishmael was also a son of Abraham. I don't know that I discussed this with you guys before, but it's basically, where the Jews descended from Isaac, there was another group of people that would descend from Ishmael, and that's modern day Islam. And that's not me just making that up, and that's not something that was just historically made up. Islam itself actually holds to that where the Jews consider Isaac the true heir of Abraham. The Muslims believe that Ishmael was the real heir, which is where a lot of their faith developed out of. It was actually a big thing behind how Muhammad wrote the Quran. And if people want to argue about the Bible being historically inconsistent and inaccurate, oh my gosh, the Quran's a whole lot worse when it comes to that. But that's a story for another time. But we see more imperfect people here. We don't have a whole lot about Isaac, so it doesn't really talk much about any of his flaws. Jacob, on the other hand, now we talked a bit about him earlier this year. He was riddled with imperfections himself, even though he ended up being the father of the people that would descend the 12 tribes of Israel. A lot of his life was basically defined by lying. You know, he tricked his brother out of his birthright. He tricked his father into giving him his brother's blessing, which wasn't supposed to go to him since he was the second son again. He lied to his uncle to basically get more of his stuff after he was leaving. That's a whole lot of the story there. His uncle lied first, and that cost him 14 years of his life. You know, so don't lie. It can cost you a lot. And then we also get further in this list, specifically linking Jesus to Judah, who was one of the many sons of Jacob. Judah being the tribe of the kings in Israel. That was the family line that David came out of. Judah traditionally were the ones that would be the kings in Israel, just like Levi were the ones that would be the priests. But Judah, despite the fact that we read that the entire monarchy of Israel came out of him, oh my gosh, he was just as imperfect as the rest of them. And the more we talk about all these people in this list, you wonder why the heck are we linking Jesus to these people that have made all these crazy mistakes? Because let's look at what it says about Judah. Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Now that's a pretty big deal right there. First of all, the fact that they even thought to include a woman in this list. They did not do that in this time. The only people that you would include in these lists were people that were considered important enough to actually do that, which usually did not include women, but here they are not saying someone's father, but someone's mother. But let's not just look at the fact that this is a woman on this list, but what this specific woman had done. Hey, you start to really wonder why these people are being linked to Jesus. So I'll cut out some of the story here, but basically Judah's son, who was married to Tamar, died. So by tradition he was supposed to give her to his second son so that she could give him a son. That didn't end up working out, so he was supposed to give her to his third son, but he was too young for it at that point, so he basically said, you know what, go back to your homeland, we're done with you, we don't need you here anymore. Basically casting off his responsibility to her. So she goes back to her home. Eventually he's in that area on some business. So she disguises herself as a prostitute, sleeps with him, has a child by him, and when he basically is going to have her put to death over this, saying, you know, you were my son's wife, you're acting like a prostitute, who did this? Show me proof of who did this to you. And she of course gave proof that it was him, and then he actually took her children as his own, actually made them his heirs. That's actually where some of the tribes of Israel came out of, were the products of out-of-wedlock relationship with someone pretending to be a prostitute. Keep in mind, this is Jesus' family tree here, and we already have this much drama in it. And then you have some unremarkable names: Perez, father of Hezron; Hezron, father of Ram; Ram, father of Aminadab, father of Nahshon; Nahshon, father of Salmon. Now this is where things get a bit interesting again. Solomon, the father of Boaz, who's one of the main characters in the book of Ruth. But we read further than that, because we do get reference to Ruth again in there. Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Does anyone here know who Rahab was?
Prostitute, right?
Yes.
Ooh,
She was the prostitute that helped out Joshua in the city of Jericho. So that's the second prostitute that we have in Jesus' family lineage here. Specifically named as the mother of the guy from the book of Ruth, whose wife, as we read here, was Ruth from the book of Ruth. She was not a prostitute, but she was a foreigner, which as a Jew you were not supposed to marry a foreigner. She was a Moabite who were not liked in Israel at all. They gave them a lot of trouble. So here we have two prostitutes and a foreigner, all three of them being women in Jesus' family lineage. Let's see here. What's after that? And then we tie all of that to Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. So we have that as Ruth being the great-grandmother of King David, the most famous, basically the most famous guy in Israel's history up to that point, and the most well-liked king that they ever had. Basically the only one that actually had the kingdom united in that period before it split into two. And so this family tree thing is kind of divided into 3 different sections. You have that from Abraham to David, then we have a second section that goes from David to the exile period where Israel kind of fell apart as a kingdom. Then you have the after exile to the time of Jesus. So we're getting into that second section now. And now we got a real doozy out of this. David was the father of Solomon. You know, we all know that. Solomon was another one of the kings of Israel that was actually somewhat good, even though he started them on a lot of things that kind of led to some of the bad times that followed that. But we read from there, Solomon, whose mother, again, another woman being referenced here, whose mother had been Uriah's wife, Bathsheba. Now, you all remember who that is? That was the woman that David had that affair with and then had her husband killed to hide it. So here we are, not only tying a fourth woman in the family line of Jesus, who was in an adulterous relationship, but that adulterous relationship not only produced one of the kings of Israel, which is just scandalous in itself, but that one of the kings of Israel himself was involved in that affair. We're getting further and further into this. You're starting to probably wonder why, if we're trying to make Jesus look good here, because that's what these genealogies were usually used for, why are we bringing up all of these basics? Basically, they're scandals. And we get further than that here. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, basically the guy that oversaw the collapse of the kingdom of Israel into 2 separate entities, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. I talked to you guys about that when we were going over all the history. And we get, I wouldn't be surprised if any of you guys don't know a bunch of these lists coming down here. I don't remember most of them. Of a bunch of the kings of Israel who were also just as bad as Rehoboam. Abijah, father of Asa, the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat, father of Jehoram, so on from there. All of these guys who messed up majorly big time, that led Israel into a whole bunch of problems and periods of decline. It was basically like that period of the book of Judges I told you guys about, where the Israelites were doing evil in the sight of God basically every 5 minutes. So again, why are we bringing up all these failures in the family line of Jesus? Now there are a few positive examples in here. Hezekiah was kind of a screw-up for most of his life, but he turned his life back to God in the last 15 years. And then a couple lines down from there, Amon, the father of Josiah. Josiah being the last real king of Israel, and actually one of the better ones. Unfortunately, he died young in a battle just before Israel collapsed. That finishes up that second section. And the third section, not really as important because none of these names really feature prominently anywhere in the Bible. This is basically just going down the family line from there until we get to Joseph, who's of course the earthly father of Jesus, who we also read in both of the infancy narratives where we read about Jesus being born. It says in both of those how Joseph actually was descended from the house of David. So technically in that, Jesus did have a claim to the Israelite throne, even though that didn't really exist anymore. But that's a lot of history I just gave you and a lot of references to a lot of characters of the Bible. We don't even talk about that often. But why is any of that important? And more importantly, why are we tying all those really imperfect and those really sketchy figures back to Jesus? So I'm sure you all guys remember this one, but Jesus, when asked by the Pharisees, why are you doing all this stuff for the sinners and the tax collectors and these prostitutes and all these other imperfect people, these people that would basically be shamed and looked down upon in society, why are you spending so much time with them if you're supposed to be the Messiah and the new king of Israel? And he always said to them, I didn't come for the righteous, I came for the sinners and I came for the lost. Now we look at that verse and on face value it sounds like he's saying, you guys are all well and good, you don't need me, but these people over here, they really need me. Of course, what we know about the Pharisees, they were not perfect people. They were anything but. They might have held to the law and everything. They might have done things by the book, but they didn't do anything out of love for other people. They didn't do much out of love of God even. And we can really see the message of what Jesus was actually saying in this line, in this family tree of his. They often claim, the Pharisees would often claim their righteousness. We even see them do it in the Gospels at points. they would claim their righteousness based on the fact that they were direct descendants from Abraham, and Abraham's children. Because Abraham was the most righteous person around. He was the father of all of Israel. But aside from the fact that he was not perfect himself, all these people that the Pharisees would claim to be, descended from, we read all throughout that family tree just how imperfect they were. They were liars like Jacob. They were adulterers like Judah. Like David. They were descended from foreigners. They were descended from adulterous relationships. These are the people that are supposed to be the most righteous, the most renowned figures in Israel's history. And here the gospel writer, who the people that study the book of Matthew widely believe that he's specifically writing to a Jewish audience with how he actually writes this gospel. And here he is starting this gospel that he's writing to Jewish audiences that want to get to know Jesus, and he's showing them just how imperfect their whole lineage and all of their ancestors that they always revere so much, just how imperfect they actually are, all to show them just how imperfect they actually are. He wasn't saying, I didn't come for the righteous so that he could call them righteous. He was saying that to remind them of the fact that none of these people were righteous. They could have been, the most holy people in the eyes of the temple, in the eyes of, their synagogues and everything. They could have seemed like the most perfect person on face value, but that didn't change the fact that every single one of them needed Jesus, or they weren't worth anything, and they certainly weren't going to know God. And that was a huge part of Jesus' character, was to show people just how imperfect they actually were and just how much we actually needed that grace. Because really, every single one of us, until we truly embrace that grace of Jesus Christ into our lives and actually let that shape our lives, we're just in that same position as them. We could be living the best life we can by the world's standards. We could be living the best life possible by most of the church's standards. But unless we are living with that grace of Jesus Christ at the heart of what we're doing, unless we're living our lives for God, for Christ, we're in no better position than any of those Pharisees we read about, and we're certainly no less hypocritical. And again, another thing that shows us is, again, just the significance of what Jesus did when he allowed himself to be born in the circumstances that he did. Like I've talked already in weeks past about just how much it meant that Jesus was not only born in a stable, which is already humiliating, and that's what poor people do basically in these times. That's not something that the king of Israel is supposed to do. He not only did that, he did it in basically one of the lowliest and poorest of towns in the lowliest and poorest part of Israel, all to basically show the Pharisees and whatnot, what Jesus was coming to do was not what they were expecting him to do, because he wasn't coming to just reform the kingdom. He wasn't coming to bring back the kingdom of Israel. He was coming down to bring the kingdom of God to earth. And he did that by dying for us. He did that, through what he taught us, so that we could actually live for God instead of living bound by not only by the sins that captivated us, but also living bound by the temptation that leads us into those sins. That's what his grace did. That's what the cross did. It freed us from those things. And that's what him being born meant for us, is that God actually did. He didn't raise us up to himself so that we could be reunited with him. He lowered himself down to our standard. Well, not our standard. He lowered himself down to live like us, so that way he could live like us and actually have us redeemed, because we couldn't be raised up to God. God is just, so that means that God couldn't just let go of the sins we had. The only way he could was if someone took the punishment for it. And that's what Jesus did on the cross. He didn't just die so that we could be forgiven. He paid the price that we actually could come before God again. In the book of Luke's genealogy, I'm not going to go much into that, but basically it kind of goes in reverse order. Rather than going from oldest to youngest of the ancestors, it goes from youngest to oldest. They had a few other names in there, like we read that Jesus is descended from Joshua as well as Amos and Nahum, who were two of the minor prophets in the Old Testament. You have a couple of books in the Bible that are named after them, which is another interesting point. They were not from the southern kingdom of Judah. They were from the northern kingdom of Israel. which are the people that would ultimately become the Samaritans. And we're linking those people to Jesus. You know, the guy that's supposed to be like, you know, the Messiah, you know, in their eyes, he was supposed to basically be the perfect Jew. Now, how could he be that if he has all this foreign blood in him? That really, again, shows another part of Jesus' character. He didn't just come for Israel. He didn't just come for the Jews. He came for all people. That's a big part of what the book of Luke is trying to teach us, is that Jesus came quite literally for everyone that would believe in him. And a lot of this stuff we read about is lineage. It's also just important for prophecy's sake. You know, through a lot of the books of the prophets that we get in the Old Testament, where it's talking about the Messiah that's going to come, which is what the New Testament's referring to a lot when it says Scripture says the Messiah will do this and that whatever else he does. That's where we get a lot of the stuff about how Jesus needed to be descended from, you know, the line of David, that he needed to be born in Bethlehem. That was actually foretold. It's not just some accident that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. That had to happen. And I'll get more into some of the prophecies we get about Jesus some other time, but yeah, that's where you get a lot of this stuff. You'll know he's the Messiah if he heals people with this, this, and this, which is actually basically the people that we read and healing about. He healed exactly those things the Messiah was supposed to. He was supposed to raise from people from the dead. He really did that at least 2 or 3 times. That's all stuff for another time, but again, you know, we think about our own, you know, our own parts of our families that might be embarrassments to us. They look at Jesus, and he's had some of like the wackiest and sketchiest of family histories that you could probably think of. And here is God basically birthing his son into this kind of family line on purpose. And all of that was just to show specifically what the character of Jesus' mission was. You know, you can be the best person on earth, but you still need Jesus just as much as the rest of us do. And that's really what I wanted to get across with this lesson tonight. I didn't stop for any questions. And when any of you need anything cleared up or have any comments or stuff you found interesting even. Yeah.
What I found interesting is that how Jesus' family line, like family tree, that they had their family tree have prostitutes.
Yeah, most people don't go into reading that thing expecting that. And Tamar herself, that is just one of the wackiest parts of the book of Genesis, because you get like Genesis 36 where it's talked about how Joseph was just sold into slavery. Then you just got this weird interlude in Genesis 37 where it's talked about Judah just having like this really weird affair with his daughter-in-law, which, you know, of course is Tamar. It's like the weirdest out of nowhere thing in the Old Testament, really. And in Genesis 38, you're right back into Joseph. It's like, and I wonder why is that here, if not for, you know, them to make this point. This woman is in Jesus' family line here.
You expect it to be so perfect.
Yeah, you really do. Now, I'm guessing you guys were not expecting to get all this out of just those random list of names that you get at the start of the Gospels, which I'm guessing most people just read right over. Did you have a hand up earlier, James?
I was going to say the same thing that he said.
Is that a hand up, Nathan?
No, I was just pointing to the top of them.
Anything else? Any questions? That was a lot of stuff we just went over. And a lot of that was also relying on you guys to remember all that history stuff we went over 3 months ago. Yeah.
How did Jesus' family line come out so horrible when he was so perfect?
Well, again, you have there that he was the Son of God. That whole family line we just read about, that was Joseph's side of the family, you know. So he was born into Joseph's family. Like the fact that we even have Jesus being descended from that, that shows that it's not just that Joseph just so happened to be married to Jesus' mother, but that Joseph was supposed to be his earthly father.
What about Mary's side of the family?
I don't think. I think it goes into that at one point, but I don't remember specifically from whom. I forgot to take another look at that. I think she was also descended from the line of Judah. I'm not positive on that though. Were you going to say something, Caleb?
What's it called? it was last week though, I did not know that Jesus, was not blood related to Joseph at all. I had no clue.
Yeah, the fact that Jesus was, married, Jesus was born from a virgin, Joseph had not consummated his marriage with Mary at that point. So, we talk about Jesus being conceived by the Holy Spirit. She was quite literally impregnated by the Spirit of God. Not in the way you're probably all thinking of. He just, it was an immaculate conception. Actually, that's not true.
It's just a-
Everyone thinks immaculate conception meant that that's how no, that is what that
It
is.
was just a miracle.
It was,
Yeah, go with that.
because the Catholics actually believe that Mary was bodily assumed into heaven, that she didn't die, but that God literally lifted her up into heaven. There's nothing really in the Bible that suggests that. I don't know where that line of thinking actually comes from. I think that was just a assumption that some of the early church came up with that the Catholics just held on to. Yeah.
One more question. Why did Jesus, oh my goodness, Jesus, was born poor, like a poor person of where he was?
Well, there's a lot of lines of thinking on why that's important.
They didn't have one.
I can't get into all of them just because there's entirely too many. I don't fully understand all of them, and I don't really agree with some of them. But the real important thing that I don't think anyone would deny this, and we see this all throughout the Gospels, is that the reason the Pharisees did not like Jesus is even though he was doing all these things that proved he was the Messiah, they didn't like him because he wasn't doing the things that they wanted him to do. He wasn't talking about overthrowing the Roman occupation. He wasn't talking about restoring the kingdom of Israel as they thought it should be restored. And he wasn't, validating their social power or the traditions that they held to. He wasn't doing any of those things. Instead, he was, talking about the Word of God in an authoritative way as the Son of God, not only claiming that he was the Son of God, which they also didn't like, but also in a way that basically subverted their own understanding, like how it wasn't that the law mattered, which that was blasphemy to them to say that the law wasn't the important part, but rather the fact that the following of the law with that loving heart, that you were actually lovingly submitted yourself to God, that was the important part. All the law was ever supposed to be was that they were supposed to love God and live in righteousness. The law was only supposed to teach them what was righteous and what wasn't. The law never saved anyone, as we read Jesus himself saying. The law was not what would give them salvation. Loving God and giving themselves to God is what would give them, where they would get salvation. Unfortunately, people had really never understood that, and they had certainly forgotten about it by that point. But Jesus being born poor, if he was supposed to be the one that was supposed to come back and restore the kingdom of Israel in their own understanding, we read a few times people saying, what good can come from Galilee? And that's where Bethlehem was. It was in Galilee, which was basically that backwoods part of Israel that no one liked. It was basically like if in America he was born in Alabama or something like that. You imagine how much people would look down on him for that here if he was coming to save us in the same way. If, say, in this context, we were supposed to be Israel. So that's really why it was important. Basically and again, I'm pretty sure I talked about this before, but I'll say it again. The fact that Jesus, a big part of why Jesus was coming in the form of a human was to really show how much God loved us and how much he was actually doing of his own accord for our sakes. Jesus is not just the Son of God, but a part of God himself. And here is God taking a piece of himself and lowering himself to a human who can feel pain, who, is subject to all the things humans are subject to, having to eat, having to be weak, all those things. God was supposed to be above all these things, and here he was not only lowering himself as a human, but a human in the lowliest of conditions. If you ask me, that's what the most important part about Jesus being born poor was. Any other questions? You guys can ask questions all night long if you wanted to. I love answering them.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, that was good. I hope you guys hope you guys got some of that. This is stuff I was only just learning recently. I hope it was as interesting for you as it was for me.
And
Let's see here.